I never thought I'd live long enough to be told I didn't deserve a seat at my own family's table. But that's exactly what happened this past Thanksgiving, right there in my daughter's brand new house in Des Moines. The smell hit me first, that buttery, heavy scent of a 20-pound butterball turkey roasting in the oven, with rosemary and thyme filling the kitchen. Sweet potatoes with marshmallows were already lined up on the counter, pumpkin pie cooling near the window. It was the kind of spread I used to dream of when I was a boy, when my folks scraped by on Campbell's soup and day-old bread. But when I walked into the dining room, my eyes caught something off. There were 12 chairs neatly arranged around a long mahogany table she must have bought from Pottery Barn. Each place setting had matching silverware, linen napkins folded into perfect triangles, even name cards. Everyone had a spot, except me. My chair, if you can call it that, was pushed against the wall near the coat rack. Not at the table, not even next to it. Like I was an afterthought, some guest who showed up without being invited. At first I thought it was a mistake. I laughed it off, pointed at the gap in the middle. "Where do you want me, kiddo?" "Right here between Uncle Joe and Grandma." That's when she turned to me, her voice sharp enough to slice through the room. "Dad, maybe you shouldn't sit there. You don't deserve that seat." The whole room went silent. I swear you could hear the cranberry sauce bubbling in the pot. My fork nearly slipped from my hand. My own daughter, the little girl I once carried on my shoulders at the county fair, telling me in front of everyone that I didn't deserve a place at her table. I glanced around. My brother shifted uncomfortably. My cousin suddenly found his phone very interesting. No one spoke. My chest tightened like I couldn't breathe. I tried to keep my voice steady. "What do you mean I don't deserve it? I'm your father." She crossed her arms, lips pressed tight. "You've never really been there, Dad." "Not in the way you think. This dinner, it's about family. And sometimes family isn't who you think it is." Her words landed heavier than any punch I'd ever taken. I worked 32 years at the GM plant in Ohio. 12-hour shifts, weekends, overtime. My hands still carry the scars from the machinery, and all of it was for her, so she could get out, go to college, live a life better than mine. But now she was standing there, telling me none of it mattered. Part of me wanted to walk out right then, to leave her perfect suburban house with its 2-car garage and its freshly painted shutters. But something in her eyes stopped me. Cold, determined, almost rehearsed, like she'd been waiting for this moment. And that's when I noticed a detail that should have been small, but hit me like a freight train. The name cards. Every single one written in her neat lawyer's handwriting, except mine. Mine was scribbled, barely legible, like an afterthought done at the last second. It wasn't just about the chair. It was deliberate. A statement. I lowered myself into the lonely chair by the wall anyway, my back to the coats, trying to swallow my pride along with a dry lump in my throat. But I couldn't stop staring at that empty space at the table, right where a seat could have been, right where a father should have been. Dinner went on, forced laughter and clinking glasses, but my appetite was gone. Every bite tasted like ash. My daughter leaned across the table, chatting with her husband about mortgage rates and holiday bonuses, as if I weren't even in the room. Finally, she looked my way, her voice carrying again for everyone to hear. "Honestly, Dad, Mom would have deserved that seat. Not you." My hands trembled under the table. My wife, her mother, has been gone for 15 years. The memory of her still haunts me every night. And now my daughter was saying she'd rather have a ghost at the table than me. I set my glass down, the ice rattling against the sides. The words came out before I could stop them. "You have no idea what I gave up for you." The room froze, forks halfway to mouths. My daughter's smile faltered just for a second, and in that second I realized something. This wasn't just disrespect. This was something deeper, a wound I hadn't seen before. But I also knew if I opened my mouth again, everything would change. The silence after I said those words was suffocating. "You have no idea what I gave up for you." It hung in the air like smoke after a house fire. My daughter froze, fork midair, while the others exchanged uncomfortable glances. She forced a laugh, trying to brush it off. Dad, you worked, sure. But Mom was the one who raised me. You were hardly there that cut deeper than the first blow. I didn't just work, I bled for decades. 32 years at that GM plant, shifts so long I sometimes slept in my truck in the parking lot. When she was at the University of Chicago, tuition was $40,000 a year. I sold my old Ford F-150, the truck I rebuilt with my own hands just to make the first semester's payment. I took the city bus through Ohio winters that hit -15, snow up to my knees, because every dime went to her education. But none of that was enough, apparently. She sat at that table, polished wine glass in hand, acting like I was nothing but a shadow. And then came another twist of the knife. She looked around the table, voice raised like she was delivering closing arguments in court. You all think he sacrificed? He didn't even buy this food. He's never contributed to this family the way you imagine. Mom carried the real load. Gasps, nervous chuckles, heads turning my way. Suddenly I was on trial, my life's work under a microscope. I wanted to scream, to shout the truth, but my throat tightened. Instead, I thought back to the day her mother died. She'd begged me to make sure our daughter never forgot where she came from. That's why I set up the trust fund. That's why I signed over the deed to our old $250,000 house in her name, so she would always have roots. I thought it was an act of love. Now, it felt like I'd handed her a weapon to use against me. And here's the part no one at that table knew. She'd already started sharpening that weapon. I remembered the faint comment she made earlier about me never contributing. It clicked. She wasn't just rewriting history for pride. She was laying a foundation. I overheard her last week on the phone with her husband, whispering about liquidating Dad's property to help cover their mortgage. At the time, I dismissed it, figured I misheard. But now, with her cold stare across that Thanksgiving table, it all lined up. The humiliation burned in my chest. My daughter wasn't just disrespecting me. She was preparing to erase me completely. The others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My brother cleared his throat. Come on, Emma. That's your dad. He paid for your schooling, didn't he? She turned to him with a shrug. That's his version of the story. He might have written some checks, but Mom made the real sacrifices. She held this family together. My jaw clenched. She knew damn well every check, every bill, every late-night overtime shift was mine. But she also knew that only proof was buried in old boxes. Tax returns, bank statements, canceled checks. Documents she probably assumed I'd tossed away years ago. I could feel the anger rising, but underneath it was something worse. Grief. The girl I raised, the one I taught to ride a bike in the cracked driveway of that old house, was gone, replaced by this stranger who wore her face but spoke with venom. I gripped my glass tighter. My hand was shaking. My cousin shot me a sympathetic glance, but no one dared to speak. No one defended me. Finally, I forced myself to smile, a thin, bitter curve of my lips. Maybe you're right, I said, my voice low but clear. Maybe I wasn't there enough. Maybe I only worked and worked and worked. But you know what's funny? Those long nights at the plant, they still left paper trails. Trails that tell the real story. Her eyes flickered, just for a second. Nervous. She masked it with another smug sip of wine. But I caught it. That flicker told me everything. She wasn't just disrespecting me out of bitterness. She was building a narrative, painting me as absent, so when the time came to claim what was mine, she'd have justification. The turkey on my plate was untouched, the gravy congealing, the stuffing gone cold. My appetite was gone, but something else replaced it. Clarity. I stood, chair scraping against the hardwood. The room stiffened. All eyes were on me. I looked right at her. You can erase me in words. You can push me to the corner of the table. But you can't erase what I've done. Not the records, not the checks, not the proof. She blinked, cheeks flushing, lips parting like she wanted to respond. But nothing came out, and in that moment, I knew I'd finally found the crack in her armor. I picked up my coat, slipped it over my shoulders, and said quietly, enough for her but loud enough for everyone to hear, "If you think tonight was humiliating for me, just wait until Christmas." That's when the truth gets its seat at the table. I barely slept that night after Thanksgiving. My daughter's words echoed in my head like a hammer striking metal. "You don't deserve that seat," over and over until I felt sick. By sunrise, I was sitting at the kitchen table of my small rental, a mug of burnt coffee in my hands, staring at the stack of old boxes I hadn't touched in years. They were tucked away in the corner of my closet, marked with fading black Sharpie. Taxes, receipts, Miski. My wife used to tease me for keeping every damn scrap of paper. "One day you'll drown in all that junk," she'd laugh. Maybe she was right. But that morning, it didn't feel like junk. It felt like ammunition. I pulled the first box open, dust rising, the smell of old paper hitting me. Bank statements, tuition bills, overtime pay stubs. Each one a snapshot of my life's sacrifices. The checks I wrote directly to the University of Chicago. 40 grand here, another 20 there. I even found the carbon copy of the check I wrote after selling my F-150, the one thing I ever owned that felt like mine. I traded freedom for her future, and she now acted like it never happened. And then, buried under a folder of W-2s, I found something I hadn't thought about in years: the original trust fund paperwork. My wife and I had set it up 15 years ago, back when our daughter was still in law school. At the time, I thought I was securing her safety. But as I reread the legalese, a chill ran down my spine. There were clauses, very specific clauses, that she wasn't supposed to touch the property except under certain conditions. Clauses that her little scheme with the mortgage bank would have violated. That's when it hit me. She hadn't just humiliated me at Thanksgiving. She was laying the groundwork to wipe me off the map. If she could rewrite history, convince everyone that I never truly sacrificed, then taking the house, the last piece of me tied to her mother, would seem justified. But she hadn't counted on me being stubborn enough to save everything. Still, I couldn't shake the ache in my chest. She wasn't just my daughter, she was my only child. Part of me wanted to rip up those papers, to let her have it all, just to keep some peace. My wife's voice haunted me. Don't let her forget where she came from. Was I honoring her memory by fighting back, or betraying it? That question gnawed at me as I flipped through the stack, until I saw something else. An email. I'd printed it years ago and forgotten it existed. It was from Emma, written in her 3rd year of law school. She'd thanked me for covering yet another insane tuition bill, admitted she didn't know how I managed it. She'd even promised one day she'd make me proud. And now she stood in her polished kitchen, wineglass in hand, acting like those words had never left her mouth. My grief hardened into resolve. She wanted to erase me? Fine. But I'd make sure the truth couldn't be erased. I called an old buddy from the GM plant, someone who'd gone into real estate law after a layoff. He owed me a favor. When I explained the situation, he whistled low. If she leveraged that property against the trust terms, she could be in serious trouble. Fraud may be worse, but it'll take proof. Proof I now had in spades. That weekend I scanned everything, every check, every tuition invoice, every email. I built a binder so thick it barely closed. Each page felt like reclaiming a piece of my dignity. But the more I assembled it, the heavier my heart grew. Because once I used it, there'd be no going back. I kept replaying that Thanksgiving table, her smug smile, her words. Mom deserved that seat, not you. Did I really want to destroy her career, her reputation, maybe even her freedom? She was my blood, but she'd already cut me out, hadn't she? Sunday night, I poured myself a whiskey and sat in silence, staring at the binder on the kitchen counter. My phone buzzed, a Facebook notification. Against my better judgment, I opened it. There she was, grinning in a photo with her husband, captioned, Big things coming soon. Excited for the future. In the background of that photo, I recognized the paperwork spread across their kitchen island. My paperwork. My trust deed. My blood ran cold. She wasn't just preparing to erase me, she was already in the process. I picked up the binder, pressed it against my chest, and whispered to the empty room, "If she wants war, then Christmas will be the battlefield." Christmas came quicker than I expected. The snow in Des Moines piled high along the driveways, lights twinkled from every porch, and families crowded into warm living rooms. Mine, though, felt colder than the frost outside. I walked into my daughter's house carrying a plain leather binder under my arm. Nobody knew what was inside but me. Her house was staged like something from a Hallmark catalog, fireplace lit, stockings embroidered with each family member's name, music drifting from a Bluetooth speaker. The table was once again set perfectly, 12 chairs gleaming under the chandelier, and just like Thanksgiving, my name card was scrawled messily and pushed toward the far end. I felt the sting, but this time it didn't pierce me. This time I had armor. Emma greeted me with that lawyer's smile of hers, the one that never reached her eyes. "Glad you could make it, Dad." "Don't cause a scene this time, okay?" Her words dripped with sarcasm, meant to humiliate me before the first toast. But I only nodded, placed my binder on a sideboard near the tree, and sat quietly. Dinner started the same way as before. Carved turkey, polite chatter, wine glasses clinking. She played hostess, telling stories, controlling the room like it was her courtroom. Then, halfway through dessert, she dropped the bomb. "We've decided to move forward with selling Dad's old property. It's wasted sitting there, and honestly, Mom would have wanted me to put it to good use." Gasps around the table. My brother's fork froze mid-air. My cousin muttered, "Wait, can she even do that?" Emma smiled sweetly. "Of course. Everything's under my name. Legally, it's mine." That was the moment I'd been waiting for. I stood slowly, the wood of my chair groaning against the floor, and walked to the sideboard. My hands didn't shake this time. I opened the binder, pulled out a stack of neatly organized papers, and laid them on the table like cards in a poker game. "Funny you should mention legal ownership," I said calmly, "because according to this trust, you broke every rule your mother and I put in place." Her smile cracked. "What are you talking about?" I flipped to the highlighted clauses. "You weren't allowed to leverage the house as collateral. You weren't allowed to sell it without my approval while I was alive. You violated both." The room buzzed, relatives whispering. Emma's husband shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I wasn't done. I pulled out the email she'd written during law school, thanking me for covering tuition. "And as for who paid your way? Here's your own words, Emma, straight from your inbox." Her face drained of color. Twist after twist landed. The relatives who had once looked at me with pity now stared at her with suspicion. She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off with the final card. I met with an attorney. A real one, not family. He confirmed this is fraud. If I take this to court, you don't just lose the house. You could lose your license to practice law. The silence was electric, thick enough to choke on. My daughter, the successful attorney, suddenly looked like a cornered child. But then she did something I didn't expect. She laughed. Cold, sharp, desperate. "You wouldn't dare. You'd ruin your only daughter? You'd make me lose everything just to prove a point?" My chest tightened. That was the twist I hadn't prepared for. The moral knife she turned back on me. I felt the room's eyes burning into my skin, waiting to see if I'd break. Was I the father who forgave, or the man who fought back? I stared at her, every sacrifice flashing through my mind. Snowy bus rides, sold trucks, calloused hands, empty nights without my wife. I thought about the trust fund set up with love, now used as a weapon against me. I leaned in close enough that she had to hear every word. "I didn't destroy you, Emma. You destroyed yourself when you erased me." Her smirk faltered. Her husband pushed back his chair, muttering, "Maybe we should step outside." He looked shaken, like he hadn't known the full truth either. another crack in her armor. I closed the binder slowly, slid it back under my arm, and looked around the table. This isn't over. Christmas dinner is just the opening argument, and then I walked toward the door, leaving the stunned silence behind me. As I reached for my coat, I heard her voice tremble for the first time. Dad, where are you going? I paused, my hand on the doorknob, the snow outside glowing under the streetlights, to make sure everyone knows exactly who deserves a seat at the table. And with that, I stepped out into the winter night, leaving her and the rest of the family hanging on the edge of what I'd do next. The night I walked out of that Christmas dinner, snow crunching under my boots, I felt something inside me shift. For the first time in years, I wasn't the man begging for a place at the table. I was the man holding the truth. I spent the next week meeting with my attorney friend, combing through every document again, making sure there were no cracks in the case. He shook his head more than once, muttering, "She's reckless." She should have known better. Every clause in that trust was like a loaded gun, and she'd pulled the trigger on herself, but part of me still wrestled with it. She was my daughter, my only child. Could I really destroy her career? Could I live with myself if she lost everything? The decision was made for me when on New Year's Eve I got a letter from the county clerk, a notice of intent to transfer deed ownership, submitted by my daughter's law firm, with her signature at the bottom. She wasn't backing down. She was doubling down. That was the final straw. I filed the petition the next morning. The hearing was set for late February. The courtroom smelled of stale coffee and floor polish, the kind of smell that clings to government buildings. My hands shook as I placed the binder on the table, but my voice didn't waver when the judge asked for my side. I showed the trust, the violations, the mortgage papers, the emails she'd written thanking me for tuition. Every piece lined up like dominoes. Her lawyer tried to spin it, painting me as an absent father, claiming the intent of the trust was flexible. But the judge's eyes narrowed at the forged filings, the clear breach of terms. And then came the final twist. My attorney produced a printout from the mortgage bank, an email Emma had sent, using her firm's letterhead, falsely claiming she had sole control of the property. Fraud, in black and white. The courtroom murmured. Her own husband, sitting 2 rows behind her, buried his face in his hands. When the gavel came down, the ruling was clear. The property reverted to me, all transactions nullified. Worse for her, the judge referred the case to the state bar for ethical review. For a lawyer, that's a death sentence. I didn't smile. Not in that moment. Watching her face crumble, the confident mask shatter into panic and shame, I didn't feel triumph. I felt something heavier. The aftermath was brutal. She lost her position at the firm within weeks. Her husband filed for separation, unable to weather the financial and public fallout. The house in the suburbs, the one she was so proud of, slipped into foreclosure. And me? I kept the old property, the one tied to her mother's memory. Not because I needed it, but because it was mine. Because it was proof I hadn't been erased. One Sunday, months later, I stood in that empty house. The floors creaked the same way they had when my wife and I carried our daughter to bed after she fell asleep watching cartoons. I ran my hand along the banister and whispered, "She can't take this from me." For the first time in years, the silence felt like peace instead of punishment. The truth is, revenge doesn't heal everything. My daughter is still out there, angry and broken, and I can't fix that. But what I did take back was my dignity, my seat at the table, whether she offers me one or not. If there's a lesson in this, it's simple. Silence lets people rewrite your story. Sometimes the only way to honor yourself and the people you've lost is to speak the truth, no matter how much it costs. Have you ever been pushed aside by your own family, told you didn't belong? If you've lived through something like that, I'd like to hear your story in the comments. And if you want to walk with me through more stories like this, hit subscribe. We'll sit at the table together where no one can tell us we don't deserve a seat.